but I never really applied any of that into writing at that time because at age 13 I started drum lessons, and that became the all-consuming obsession. All other interests went by the board.
For a man whose name became synonymous with the rhythmic complexity and intellectual ambition of Rush, Neil Peart never seemed especially enamored with being the center of attention. Yes, he was the man behind some of rock's most intricately composed drum parts, a performer whose live kit had to be arranged in a circle simply to accommodate the sheer reach of his percussive vocabulary. But Peart's mind, forever in motion, was rarely caught staring at his own reflection. His reverence instead was always pointed outward, toward the world, toward literature, toward movement, and above all, toward music, made with grace and authority. It's easy to imagine Peart idolizing players who shared his muscular approach to odd-time aggression and ambitious construction. And yes, he admired his share of technicians. But in a 1989 interview with Modern Drummer, Peart peeled back a quieter, more contemplative layer to his influences. He didn't list the expected titans. He didn't reach for the showmen, the soloists, or the flamboyant innovators whose flourishes threatened to pull the spotlight away from the song itself. Instead, he singled out 3 drummers whose playing might not leap out of the speakers, but would, with careful attention, hold you in place. "The 3 drummers I mentioned I can count among my favorite drummers," he said, "although they don't play the kind of drumming that I like playing." It was a striking admission. Peart, ever the craftsman, was revealing his admiration not for complexity or fireworks, but for command, for subtlety, for the unshowy power of doing precisely what a song needs, and nothing more. He summed it up in one phrase: tremendous authority. That elusive quality, neither learned nor forced, was what drew him to this quiet trinity, and each, in their own way, reflected a different kind of mastery. The first of these was a drummer whose name might not immediately ring out in the canon of household rock gods, but whose fingerprints are scattered across some of the most emotionally articulate music of the late 20th century. A classically trained percussionist with a supple jazz vocabulary, his playing had become a secret weapon for artists looking to strike a balance between emotional subtlety and rhythmic sophistication. For Peart, his appeal was immediate and enduring. "Most of his drumming is very simple," he said, "but it is so elegant." It was that word, elegant, that kept resurfacing in Peart's vocabulary when speaking about this player. There was a restraint to his performances that never felt cautious. The beats had weight without aggression, movement without haste. "You can listen to some simple drummers and tell they know everything," Peart mused. "It's implicit. They have a certain confidence and agility on the drum set." He wasn't speaking in abstractions. He was speaking of Manu Katché. Born in Saint-Maur-des-Fossés, just outside Paris, Katché's early grounding in classical percussion at the Conservatoire laid the foundation for a career that defied categorization. He could glide effortlessly between pop, world music, and avant-garde jazz, and yet his playing always sounded like him. Measured, graceful, quietly assured. Katché came to wider prominence through his work with Peter Gabriel, particularly on So, where his unorthodox approach helped reframe the very idea of what pop rhythm could be. On In Your Eyes, his drumming is a masterclass in texture and momentum, never overwhelming, always compelling. He also contributed to Robbie Robertson's cinematic solo debut, and later to Joni Mitchell's Chalk Mark in a Rainstorm, always bringing the same fluidity and taste. Peart admired not only Katché's technique, but the sense of intention behind every note. There was no filler. "Most of his drumming is very simple," he repeated, "but it is so elegant." The elegance was not just in how he played, but in what he chose not to play. The second drummer in Peart's quiet pantheon came from a different tradition. British, pop-rooted, and blessed with an instinctive understanding of the power of simplicity. His playing, too, could seem unassuming on first listen. No explosive fills, no outrageous time signatures, no grandstanding. But listen closely, and something altogether richer begins to emerge. He plays very simple patterns with very few fills, Peart said admiringly. But again, what he plays is so elegant, and right for the music. It wasn't just the absence of clutter that impressed him. It was the authority with which this drummer anchored even the most emotionally delicate arrangements. That drummer was Kevin Wilkinson. Wilkinson's name may not command the recognition it should, but his presence shaped the sound of a generation. As the rhythmic backbone of bands like China Crisis, The Waterboys, and Squeeze, he helped define a certain strain of literate, soulful British pop in the 1980s and early 90s. His style was marked by a kind of rhythmic empathy. He didn't just accompany songs, he seemed to understand what they needed before they did. Peart was particularly struck by Wilkinson's ability to navigate complexity without ever disrupting the surface calm. He can play quite complex material with such authority that they just flow by you smoothly, he said. That word, flow, is crucial. In Wilkinson's hands, tricky phrasing never felt angular or self-conscious. It moved like water, graceful, but with hidden strength. There is a tendency among fans and critics alike to overlook the kind of playing that refuses to draw attention to itself. But Peart, ever the observer, knew better. Wilkinson's authority came from instinct, from years of playing music in service to songs rather than ego. It's perhaps no surprise that his playing impressed one of the most exacting musicians of his generation. Peart wasn't the only one who noticed. Musicians who worked with Wilkinson often spoke of his calm, grounding presence, the kind of drummer who made everyone else better simply by being there. His tragically early death in 1999 robbed the music world of a unique voice behind the kit, but to Peart, and to those who really listened, his rhythmic touch lives on in every elegant bar he played. The third and final drummer in Peart's triad was arguably the most versatile of them all, with a background rooted in funk, a sensibility shaped by jazz, and a career that exploded into the public eye through a band whose blend of sophistication and groove changed British pop forever. His style was perhaps the most difficult to pin down, which may explain why Peart was so drawn to it. This drummer, Peart said, had tremendous authority, but he also brought something else, a mastery of dynamics, of feel, of transition. He knew how to execute different dynamics, Peart noted, particularly when they felt simple one minute and complex the next. There was nothing mechanical about his approach. Every beat had contour, every rhythm had shape. The drummer in question? Phil Gould. Best known as the founding drummer of Level 42, Gould fused muscular funk with sophisticated pop in a way that sounded effortless, but was anything but. Alongside bassist and frontman Mark King, he helped define the band's early sound, tight, syncopated, and deeply rhythmic, yet never losing its melodic core. Gould's drumming on tracks like The Chinese Way or Love Games was a revelation, funk grooves infused with jazz harmony and a rock player's sense of propulsion. But what Peart loved most was the way Gould navigated tension and release, particularly when they felt simple one minute and complex the next, he said, an apt description of a style that could turn on a dime without ever sounding abrupt. Peart, whose own drumming was often rigorously constructed, seemed drawn to the freedom in Gould's playing. Not wildness, Gould was always in control, but flexibility. A sense that the groove could breathe, change shape, surprise you. Infectious, Peart called it, speaking not just of Gould, but of all three of the drummers he admired most. They infected him not with notes or tricks, but with ideas, with philosophies of playing that lingered long after the music stopped. Peart's celebration of these three players, Cache, Wilkinson, Gould, tells us as much about him as it does about them. For all his mythic status, he remained a listener first. He approached music not as a sport, but as a conversation, and what he valued most was the ability to listen deeply, to play with empathy, to know when silence might speak louder than snare. None of the three played like Peart. And that perhaps was the point. "They don't play the kind of drumming that I like playing," he acknowledged, but he was never one to confuse admiration with imitation. These were not blueprints for his own style. They were reminders of what was possible when ego was set aside and attention placed firmly on the needs of the song. "Tremendous authority," he said. It's a phrase that runs through all his remarks like a thread. Not power, not dominance, but poise. Confidence without arrogance, precision without sterility, emotion without indulgence. That was what he sought in others, and, ultimately, what he aimed to refine in himself. Peart passed away in 2020, leaving behind a catalogue of drumming that will be studied for generations. But for those who truly want to understand what made him great, not just as a technician, but as a thinker, they would do well to study the ones he studied, the ones who played with elegance, with feel, with authority. And in their quiet brilliance, one finds the echo of a man who listened as deeply as he played.